Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. Hello, all around the world. Thank you once again for joining us on these EdTech chats, the space for Open LMS to share a little bit inside the company, what's happening in the different areas, how we think about things in general. We're very excited about this conversation today. I'm very happy to be joining us from LinkedIn. If you're joining us live, you can leave your comments in the section. We can get to read it. Hopefully we have a conversation. Thank you so much if you're following us on LinkedIn. We just reached 20,000 followers. We're also streaming on YouTube. If you join us, you can also comment there. We'll see the conversations. And we're also on other social media if you want to follow us or just reach out to us that way. I'm very happy today to talk with Sean Tierney. He's our Vice President for Customer Success. We'll talk about what it means, a lot of stuff. We'll unpack that today. Sean is an aerospace engineer who spent over a decade as a pilot in the US Navy. Lots of missions going around the world. And then he took a turn into the software engineering, technical roles, technical sales, then heading customer success teams, or leading leaders in a way in various industries, especially in EdTech in the most recent decade, I would say. He's kind of perfected a way to manage geographically diverse teams with means and ways that hopefully he will share with us. And as I said, he's our senior leader for customer success. Very happy to have you here, Sean. How are you today?
Hi, Chris. Good to be here. How are you?
Good, awesome. You and I just saw each other recently, also publicly, as we were sharing the news of the Open LMS Awards. We're very excited about it. You can read more in a little blog post that we shared. Okay, so just to kick off this conversation, I have a clip from one of the team members, Krista. Well, we want to talk about three things, or kind of three topic areas today. One is about like team building and your approach to team building. What does that look like for you and for the people you work with? Then we'll talk a bit into professional development. And then we'll try to circle into the idea of how to make clients feel like they're part of the team that we work with, and why is that important, why that matters. But let me just share you Krista.
We are open to getting a new perspective, and it becomes like a new two-way street of learning and fostering teachable moments, having a fresh pair of eyes on a project within our team. And that's just amazing to get that benefit and that reward out of empowering people. And I think that in this way, this has helped with better retention and less burnout. And I can only hope to be open to feedback from our team, from our people, and even our clients, and how to support their professional dreams as well.
All right, so I guess a good question to start is, what would be kind of a principle or a core tenet of your way to think about team building?
It's a good question, Chris. And I'll talk about it specifically in relation to the support organization. I think Krista said it well, that a focus on professional development is important. But one of the things that when I first got into the support industry, I had a mentor tell me, he said, when you're in customer support, you have to remember that customer support is a team sport. And never forget that customers are a part of that team. So engagement with the customers and trying to create as much communication between your support organization and the clients that you serve is probably the most important thing.
Okay, and that sounds really, really good, really interesting. I wonder if you can break it down a little bit or make it a little more visual, if you will, of how can that how do you see that principle of the team sport turning clients into part of the team, kind of maybe in your day-to-day life or on your interactions?
Yeah, I think one of the key focuses there is to the emphasis on training and education. As you mentioned, I spent 10 years in the Navy before moving into the EdTech industry. And, I thought it was going to be a much bigger change than it was. What I found is that there's an awful lot of similarities between EdTech and the military in two key principles. One is that emphasis on continuous learning, lifelong learning, educating and learning whenever you have time. And that I see both in the EdTech world and in the military world. The other thing is this overarching view of the concept of a mission. In both communities, they're driven by people who are passionate about serving a purpose-based mission on core principles. And it brings teams together, and I really enjoy those environments.
Awesome. Yeah, I was kind of holding my tongue on that transition and your Navy experience, and I just saw a picture that you shared with me the other day, and I just thought it was a really cool picture just by itself. But then I think the story behind it was pretty amazing. So why don't you tell us about like that experience, and just lead the way, please.
Yeah, this was an interesting one because we were kind of in uncharted territory. There was an F4 in Key West that was doing some training missions when they had an engine malfunction, and the plane went off the airfield and into the mangrove swamps. And if you're familiar with Key West, it's all the way at the far southern tip of Florida through a long chain of islands. And nobody had ever picked or lifted an F4 from a helicopter before. And it was either we did it with our helicopter, or they were going to have to bring a crane all the way down the causeway from Miami, build a road into the swamp and bring the crane in, which would have been an environmental nightmare and taken months to put together. So this is one where, we brought the team together into kind of the unknown, had to make a certain amount of guesses about what we were doing. The weight of the F4, the weight of the water inside of the F4 that we were going to have to lift because we didn't know how much there was. And it was reasonably short-lived, but there was an awful lot of coordination, both with the ground crew and the air crew and the base crew, to get this coordinated and done.
Yeah, and well, I think you mentioned about the mission. I think that's something pretty much everyone agrees on the importance of a mission. But in this case, I'm wondering, like, how do you convince? Because I know there is like a big reason to having to go down and pick up that aircraft that crashed. I'm imagining some people would think, why would we do that? That plane is no longer working. Why are we spending all these resources just picking that up to bring it back to base?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors in that. I think clearly the plane is not going to fly again. That plane is done. So there might be an instinct to, well, let's just leave it there and let it go. But if you're familiar with planes, they have an awful lot of hazardous material inside of them. There's the fuel inside the plane, there's the hydraulic fluid, there's the oil, there's things like that. And it's also in the Key West area, there's an awful lot of wildlife in those mangrove swamps, and dropping this type of industrial machinery into it, it's not exactly conducive to a good environment. So there was an imperative to get this plane out as soon as possible and preserve the environment that surrounds the Naval Air Station.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I relate that to kind of the importance of the mission, of the importance that whoever is part of that team understands, like, especially if it's kind of a fairly complex mission or that has a lot of moving parts, how you make sure that people are, I guess they don't have to know everything that's involved, but they have to have an awareness of why it's important, why everything that we do is important, even if it doesn't look like. Right.
Absolutely. And the alternative, of course, was, definitely prohibitive, bringing a crane down that causeway and having to build the road, and then subsequently probably having to take that same road back out again to preserve the environment was just prohibitive. So there was a big focus on us being able to do this, even though we'd never done it before.
Right, yes. I think that leaves us way to our second clip here. We have Hannah. So we can talk about like the professional development's implication of that, of turning kind of the mission into skills, if you will, and tasks. So here is Hannah.
To write down our professional development plans and where we think the direction that they think they might like to go. And I have on my team, everything from, I'd like to work towards moving towards our tier 2 team, to I am in a master's program for learning design. And I know that as a career switcher myself, the world is big and diverse, and work and careers, all of it, everything, not just work and careers, is changing at like a breakneck speed. And you never know what something with professional development is going to resonate with someone.
Yeah, so Hannah here is talking about how professional development, well, I think for me, this is kind of a new vision, compared to kind of years in the past where if it's obvious that we need to train people to do the job. But I think here, and I've heard not just from her, from you, from many people in the company, how they see it just as a way to support the person, kind of not just directly to what it means in the jobs, but in a broader sense, right?
Right.
And yeah, maybe it's a culture thing, because it's surprising to me that a company can say, "Oh, you want to learn about this? Yeah, please go ahead." Of course, I realize there is a reason why, right? Why we kind of encourage this kind of open space in that sense.
Yeah, and I think Hannah did a nice job of describing it. Really, when you focus on education and training and making opportunities available to people, it really is about taking down barriers and democratizing information to make it available for everybody. There's no telling, as she mentioned, at the pace of change, where your career or where your interests might take you. And a lot of times you'll get interested in one thing and find out halfway down that path, you discover something new. Like right now, there's all sorts of different types of AI that are catching people's attention, and it's bringing their careers into whole new areas that we haven't thought about. And the idea that, if you overly structure things and mandate specific things, you're going to drive people into an area that doesn't necessarily expand as fast as you want. And being able to democratize the information, open up opportunities for people, and give them the opportunity to have a hand in their own development is a massive empowerment strategy.
Right. Yes. I can help to come back to the Key West experience, because you're telling me that you trained as a pilot and you learn how to pick large, heavy stuff from one place, leave it on another place, and that gives you kind of an idea of what you have to do. But then you come into this very specific, uncharted territory, and I think in some way, those little things that you did not see as directly relevant, they somehow become valuable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes not just into career building, but hiring as well, in the sense that, when I was interviewing for a job early on, it was in a very different field from what I was in. And I was actually curious. They said, "Well, why are you interested in me? This is not applicable to what specifically I've done in the past." And he said, "Our business is dynamic. We don't know where we're going to be in 5 years." So to use a sports analogy, he said, if I'm playing golf today and I hired golfers, in 5 years, we might be playing tennis and I won't have anybody that can do that. So he said, I don't hire just golfers, I hire athletes. I want somebody that can move between sports easily. And so he looked for those core capabilities and people that had the ability to learn and expand and adapt to new environments as they came along.
Yeah, wow. Athletes, I think it's a great word. Hannah used problem solvers.
Absolutely.
Problem solvers. But I wonder, like now in practice, how does that affect the way you develop, like, say, a professional development plan? It looks like this is easier said than done, like to allow for this flexibility, but still know that there are business imperatives, right? Customer service imperatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a balance that you have to find. One of the first things you have to do is understand what are the needs of the business. And the needs of the business are pretty wide, particularly in like a customer support environment. I need people that know how that need to know how to interact with customers and communicate really well, both written and spoken. I need people that understand our core technology and our software. I need people that understand it from a technical sense as well as from a user perspective. And then we also need people that understand the hosting and cloud infrastructure at a very deep level. So not everybody is going to know all of those things. And what you want to do is cast the net and know what areas you need skills in, and then put that out to the team and ask them to say, well, where do you want to go? And what are the things that you want? And look for the overlaps. And that's where you invest, is when you find things that people are interested in and where you are looking to develop and expand your capabilities. That's where you invest heavily, and it does very well. But again, you need to think of it in terms of, a wide blanket and kind of a matrix of skills of people on the team. You can't rely on just one.
Yeah. I think, like, going to the metaphor of the athletes, I think there are some, what do you call it, like stars, mega stars, and people, especially like at a company, then end up in one place and another, and they develop a very particular, very useful, very valuable set of skills, like cross domain and stuff. And I think it's a reality that people move away, and especially we accept this premise of professional development, just letting them go, like where they may take. So it might take them somewhere else outside this company. How do you maybe avoid or protect against depending on those kinds of people, or how do you nurture them, make them stay? I don't know. I think it's quite a complicated issue there.
It may be, but there's some things to keep in mind. Number one is, you will sometimes find people, what I like to call the hero syndrome, where you've got one or two core people that have all of the knowledge and everybody goes to them, but they aren't developed. You're relying on just these one or two core people, and that's a very vulnerable place for an organization to be. You don't want that, because it makes you inflexible from that. And that's where I talk about the democratization of the information and the training, is that you want as many people trained on as many different things as possible. I think like a Swiss Army knife, the more Swiss Army knives you have with multiple tools, the better and more flexible and more resilient you can be. The other concern is, sometimes people say, well, gee, if we invest too much in training, maybe they'll leave, maybe they'll go to other opportunities. And I always think, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's kind of your leadership. Your role as a leader is to have a pipeline of candidates ready to move in as these people move out, because then you develop a reputation as, an incubator. People look towards your company as a place to get prime talent, and that attracts even more candidates. Which is exactly where you want to be. So you're helping people expand their lives, expand their opportunities, and also creating opportunities for new people coming in.
Yeah, I understand. And as I say, I think that's a novel concept for me. And I would assume it is kind of novel for many people. So if there's an organization, a client, or somebody who is saying, I don't know, I'm not so sure of kind of having this kind of approach, I would just say to them, maybe in terms of what would be the risks of not doing so, of not prioritizing the professional development of the person?
I think the challenge is that you wind up with a stagnant organization. At some point, people will move. Some will. run the risk of losing that core talent and not having others that can step in or aren't prepared to step in. And so that's why you need to emphasize that continuous improvement and pipeline of talent, so that people have a natural flow into, through, and in the organization. And I think it just breeds a mindset of energy.
Energy. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned energy, because I think that's a way to describe my brief conversation with Philip, our last clip of the day. Kind of going back to the idea of turning clients into team members. But let's just listen to Philip.
They come to us for help, and we can see that resolution through to the end, and that they can be, perhaps they'll be relieved in the end. Maybe there was something they didn't know how to do, and they didn't quite know how to get that information out. They know what they want to do, but they can't put it into words. And with our experience, we're able to sometimes draw that out of them, so that when they don't know what the words are, we can help them find the words and make suggestions, and then they can go, yes, that's the thing that I need. That's exactly what it is. And it's very satisfying to hear that.
Yeah, so, well, I think the word energy, because like you're interacting with someone, with a client or even a team member, they have a different mindset, especially when you're kind of starting to get to know them. You think they want something, but they really want something else. And it's kind of on you in a way to really listen and to really be kind of present in those interactions. And I also see kind of a benefit of, like one benefit out of the gate of thinking of clients as team members is thinking of the mindset of, we will be interacting a lot, not just like one ticket off, but no, we're kind of starting a relationship, and we're starting to, the idea, I guess, is to start speaking a common language, right? But let's talk about this. How do you think we can get started with that kind of this develop this closeness or this proximity to clients?
Yeah, I think communication is the biggest piece, and Phil touched on a couple of good points. You know, when you're talking to customers, and I think, as you said, the common language is important. You know, when you're running a global support team, the nuances in the words you use can make a huge difference. Puppy and small dog are not necessarily the same thing. So it's important, the more communication you have, to catch those nuances. And that just recently came into play, even with an upgrade we had in the past week, where a customer was working towards an upgrade, and we went through the normal processes of looking at the plugins that they had and prepping their sandbox for development in preparation for the migration. And then we hit a holdup because we had to do some plugin reviews on some of them. And there was a delay there. And eventually the customer came to us and said, what are we waiting on? And it had been sitting for a while, and there were frustrations growing on both sides. And we dug into it, and we came back and we said, well, actually, we're waiting on this one plugin to finish its review. And they looked at us and said, we don't even use that plugin. So like, you could hear, you know, foreheads hitting the table at that point, where we were like, you know, we've been working on this review for them for 2 weeks, assuming the status quo, assuming that because it was on the legacy system, that they would want it on the next system, as opposed to just taking that one extra step. And as soon as we realized they don't need that one on the new system, we could move the migration forward right away. And we actually started working on it within the hour. But it was that one nugget that had delayed us. And so that's where the dialogue between customers is really important.
Right. But how about the scale of that? You know, like, we are a fairly large organization. The support, customer success operation, I think it's over 100 people, right?
Yep.
How do you scale that level of closeness with a client?
It's difficult. You know, and to be honest, it is a balancing act of trying to balance the level of automation that you use versus the level of personalization and understanding. Automation it does not do a great job of interpreting tone. or communicating in universal languages. There's some advancements in the AI world that are starting to do that. But having the human element in there is important. So you have to look for what are the mechanical processes that you can automate, but still keep the human contact with the customer when you're dealing with something that's critical to them. To give you an idea in terms of scale, we get roughly 20,000 tickets a year into our support organization, and that's roughly 1,500 to 2,000 tickets a month, depending on the cycles of the institutions. And for every single one of those that we close, we send a survey to the customer. Now, unfortunately, we only get about an 11% response rate. I'd like to see that up higher, probably about 20 to 40. But that means we get about 2,000 surveys a year, and I get to read every one of them, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, well, you asked me to share some of the good, the encouraging ones, and I know you do that regularly to kind of commend anyone in the team who's getting these kind words from a client. And I'm sorry, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up AI, and particularly because I know that you were recently at this Zendesk event. Zendesk is like the customer support platform, the ticketing system that we use, which has many other features. And you were talking about how they were talking about AI. And when it comes to customer service, I think that's kind of a really big warning, or like alarms run off when you mix AI with customer service. How do you factor AI and all these new things that are coming up into what you just mentioned about this balance of human and automation?
Yeah, there's some really amazing things coming out in the AI realm, and Zendesk has actually featured a lot of them in what they're bringing forward to the market, and a lot of it's really interesting to us. But a lot of it depends on understanding your business. So there's an awful lot of things in the customer support world that are what I would call B2C, where it's customers or consumers dealing with a vendor, where you're not necessarily having a long-term relationship or that type of thing. Whereas in a B2B model that we're in, where we're serving institutions with a technical service, an LMS service that we provide, that is something that we provide over years. And so there's a relationship that needs to be developed there with a relatively small number of people. And our focus has always been in ensuring that we're not using automation just to tick a box. Like, well, we should be responding to the customer faster. Why don't we just have an automated email go to them? We don't want to send automated emails unless there's something productive around it that is a routine templated sort of thing that is information. Like, we might say, hey, if you request this, we're going to automatically send you our policy on it. But we still want a human to engage to manage the actual request from the customer. So finding the balance of where to plug in the automation, like maybe as an agent is working a ticket, having automation bring information in from other systems to present to them so that they have a better understanding of the customer. That's a great use of AI. Having AI look at our past tickets, our knowledge base, and other resources of information to bring information to the agent faster and better, and possibly even suggest a response is a great idea. But having automation automatically send the response on something that requires interpretation or understanding, we want a human in the loop, and that's just the way our business model works for that.
Yeah, I can't help but agree. So AI is not the latest tool. It's the latest tool, but I think in a long stream of tools that would increase our productivity and probably liberate time for people to do other things. In your mind, then what would be the human's most important activity, or where should the effort of the people in a support role should go to?
I think understanding what's going on with the client and the client environment makes a huge difference. So, when we bring tickets in, we could have 4 or 5 tickets about the same issue or the same type of issue. Like, for instance, maybe a customer is having trouble importing courses into their LMS. Well, that's a fairly common issue where somebody might have problems importing a course or course data. It makes a huge difference if that is building out courses for next semester or building out courses or tests for final exams that are next week. What's happening and when in the customer environment is absolutely critical. And it usually takes a human to be able to understand the business cycle of the customer and to listen to the customer about the peripheral information or think to draw that information in to understand the environment and the stressors that might be happening in that environment, which allows us to decide, hey, is this question a low priority question, or does this need to be prioritized because there are things happening with that customer that are unusual at that time? And I would even give an example of that. Is this past season, there were hurricanes that hit North Carolina. We have a number of customers in the North Carolina environment. Well, they immediately had to go to remote distance learning for a large number of those, and also had some IT infrastructure issues. We had several teams of people come together and specifically focus on how do we deal with these tickets in this environment, because it's not business as usual for them, so it can't be business as usual for us.
Right. Yeah. I think going back to the surveys, and I think kind of those touch points. Recently, we made a change in the survey. I think it's subtle, but it's kind of meaningful, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of asking, perhaps you can explain it better, like the way we try to dissociate the severity of the issue on a technical level and how the user considers its urgency in the service that we send for the tickets.
Yeah, well, we actually use 2 different survey methods with our customers. There's a general ticketing survey where every time they come to us with an issue, when we solve that issue or think we've resolved the issue, we do send them a survey and ask, how do we do? It's a very transactional type of system. And we just started using a Likert scale on that gives us a little bit more granularity. But that really is, how did we do on this particular issue? Which gives you some insight, and particularly if you're trying to draw similarities for how you're serving different types of issues in general, that can give you some good data. What it doesn't tell you is the general sentiment of the customer overall. And that's where we've started having a more open survey that we started doing annually, and we're looking at now bringing in it to a subset of customers quarterly, where it's much more open-ended. We ask about, net promoter score. How well do you think we're doing? Would you recommend us to a friend? And then some more open-ended questions that gives us a little bit freer context from the customer to find out, tell us more, not just pick A, B, or C, or the scale on the Likert scale, but actually, give us some dialogue and tell us in your own words what's happening. It requires a lot more time to read through those and understand what they're doing. Again, we could use some AI to maybe draw out some threads. It's nice for grouping things and giving you general themes, but we generally wind up reading every survey individually to get the real meaning of what's going on with the customer. So it's one thing to give you a data overview, and another to actually understand the words of the customers. And that's given us a whole new perspective on what's going on with the customers. And that's where we get much better direct feedback on things that we need to fix and change.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And I guess the other part, which probably should maybe the topic for another conversation, is what to do with that interaction. How can we close the loop there? But for us to just to start wrapping things up, what would you say you have learned in this process of figuring out more ways, more touch points, more ways to listen to the clients? What do you think that will allow us? Where do you think that will take us in this process? In the context of turning clients into making them feel closer and closer, kind of part of the work.
Yeah, I think it's done a lot already. I've had a number of different direct conversations with customers. There's times when even just on the transactional CSAT scores, we'll get a negative response, and I'll pick up the phone and call the person, and just ask, say, where did we miss the mark? Can you give me some feedback? And those phone calls have led to some of the best insight as to what's happening in the customer environment, where we realize, okay, maybe by the rule book we followed the process, but that process doesn't adapt to what's happening in the customer environment. Another great feedback that we got from the customers was, when we're doing upgrades, that we usually give customers 4 weeks to test the upgrades, which is great. Sounds like a lot of time, sufficient time to test the system before you upgrade it. Except we also want to do these upgrades when schools aren't busy, when they don't have classes in session, which turned out to be this last round during the holiday season. Well, 4 weeks during the November, December timeframe, particularly in the US, is not really 4 weeks of solid work. So if you're going to do it during that time, there's going to be people out. You may want to look at 5 or 6 weeks to give some extra, or shift your window of opportunity. And that was just one of those things where we were looking at the numbers and not looking at the environmental conditions. And again, that was a feedback session we had with the customer where they gave us some really good coaching on that. And so that's going to change how we look at upgrades and how we schedule upgrades and how we time them out.
Awesome. Okay, well, like I said, if you're an Open LMS client, you may expect a call from us soon at any time. All right, well, I think that is what we have for today. Sean, thank you so much for your time, for this conversation. I hope it's gives some insight to people. If you have any comments, please let us know. Please leave your thoughts, your comments. Thank you once again, Sean.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody else.
And for everyone, just to update you, coming up, eLearn Magazine is doing a chat with Joe Thibault from Cursive on academic integrity and AI. AI did not kill academic integrity. Maybe it didn't die. For our clients, Office Hours will be doing a session next week for our North American and Europe clients. And the week after that, for Spanish, we usually take a break off because of Holy Week. And on May, we're very excited. We're partnering up with Brickfield Labs, Brickfield Education Labs, for our Global Accessibility Awareness Day, where we'll be sharing an accessibility IQ, where you can check what's your IQ on accessibility, and then we can all share out results and compare and contrast, and then check how we did. So I hope you tune in for this, for everything. Keep subscribe to us, keep following us. Please get in touch in the all the avenues that we have. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.